So a few years ago, I made a really dumb mobile game called Frantic Architect, which ended up getting featured on the front page of the App Store and getting over 400,000 downloads. I've been thinking about making a video about this for a while, but I didn't do it because I'm not sure what the moral of the story is. It's one of those events that you can spin it in different ways. Either I could talk about how I'm this really smart guy who got a bunch of people to download my game even though it sucked, or I could talk about how I wasted a lot of time building something that's basically useless. I did write an article about this back in 2017, but I feel like I didn't explain the full story very well. And then the Reddit commenters seem to get the impression that I'm just this sellout who made the game to make money. But come on, man, that's like totally not true. I made the game so then I can make this YouTube video several years later and make money from that. This video is divided into two sections. First, I'll explain what happened. I'll tell you how I came up with the idea for this game, how I built the prototype in one day, and my analytics for the installs and the revenue. In the second section, I'll explain the bigger picture of why my marketing strategy worked and how you can apply these ideas to other projects besides mobile games. Let's get started. If you remember back in early 2014, everybody was playing Flappy Bird by indie developer Dong Nguyen, who is apparently making $50,000 a day at some point from the in-game ads. Shortly afterwards, a lot of other really simple casual mobile games started taking over the App Store and Google Play, and people started calling these games hypercasual. The defining features of these games is that they're extremely short, repetitive, and easy for anyone to understand. Basically, the sole intention of these games is to show ads to brain-dead people like me. It basically works like this. Bro, you suck at this game. Let me help you out. I'll give you 10 more lives if you download this app first. When hyper-casual games started taking off, I had already been building games for a couple years, so I thought, oh, this must be a great way to cash in on my skills. I was totally wrong. It's actually very hard to monetize because there's so much competition since these games are so easy to make. And the user retention is very bad since nobody really likes these games that much, so you don't make very much money per user. But back then, I wasn't thinking carefully about how to solve these problems. I was just too tunnel visioning on researching the popular apps and trying to reverse engineer their success instead of building something that I actually wanted to use myself. So I would scroll through the top hyper-casual games on iOS and Android, and I would play them to try to get inspiration for my own ideas. When I did this, I noticed that these games usually have two companies showing up on the splash screen. One is the game developer, and the other is the publisher. And most of the popular hyper-casual games are actually published by the same few companies. The biggest one right now is Voodoo, and their apps have more downloads than any other company in the world besides Facebook and Google. The publishers help promote your game in three main ways: social media ads, cross-promotion from other games in their network, and helping your game get featured on Apple and Google. These publishers would really sell developers like me on the fact that they had these inside contacts at Apple and Google, so you would have a much better chance of getting featured if you worked with them. I don't know how much of this is actually true, but these days you can actually just submit a form to Apple and request to get your game featured, so you should definitely try that out first. But back then, I was just really gullible and I liked the idea of working with a bigger company. It just made me feel more legit, I didn't want to feel like just some dude making a game by myself. I didn't do too much research into the tangible benefits of working with these publishers, but the funny thing is that things actually turned out better than it should have given the kind of mindset that I had. My strategy was to build one game prototype after another and send them out to all the publishers, and I would find these publishers just by looking through the top charts on Android and iOS. I used the Unity game engine to build my games, which I really like. It's very easy to pick up and also very powerful. The first prototype I made was Hasty Enemies, and basically you're this blue guy and you're running around and you're trying to kill these red guys that are chasing you by running circles around them and having them body slam into each other. And I know this is really weird, and surprise, surprise, it didn't get accepted by any of the publishers. But then I did notice a little bit later that one of the publishers ripped off my idea and made a better version of it, and I can't really blame them. I'm pretty smart. The second was Super Aquarium, which I talked about in one of my older videos, and I spent way too much time on this. It was a month and a half of full-time effort while I was on summer break, and again it was rejected by all the publishers I sent it to. Third is this game called Square Stack, and it's basically a variation of the classic Stacker arcade game where you have to match up the colors of the squares, and this was also rejected by all the publishers. Finally, I came up with the idea for Frantic Architect while I was on a plane, and I was watching some documentary about classical architecture. The game design is based off of Square Stack plus another game that I worked on a few months before, and I think sitting on the plane doing nothing and just watching that architecture documentary sort of helped me weld all those ideas together. I built the prototype in one day, and I included the source code in the description in case you're interested. It's really simple. You just tap anywhere on the screen to place down the glowing block, and you have to grow your tower as big as possible without making it imbalanced. Unity handles all the physics, so I mainly just had to code the placement of the blocks, and then I checked the speed at which the tower is moving in order to determine if the thing is falling down. And once it falls down, the game restarts. It's kind of like a metaphor for life, you know. It's not about how many times you fall, but how many times you rise and get back up and watch my ads so I can get money. 2 publishers offered me contracts for this, and the one I accepted was from a company called Bulkypix. They're in France, and they've actually released some good games before they decided to pivot and work with shovelware developers like me. The terms of the contract were terrible. They basically offered me nothing in exchange for 50% of the revenue. They did say that they would promote my game for 1 week after launch, but to be honest, I'm not really sure that they did that. I got the contract in October 2015, and by now, I was starting my last year of university, so I was really busy with job interviews and studying. I lost motivation to work on Frantic Architect pretty quickly. I didn't think the game was very good to begin with. It wasn't the kind of thing that I would play myself. And then Bulkypix asked me to implement a lot of really boring stuff, like translating the text, or designing some marketing graphics, or adding achievements and leaderboards and things like that. The more I worked on it, the more I realized that this isn't a good use of my time. And my main motivation for finishing it now was just to put something on my resume. And this is not very motivating, so I procrastinated super hard. It took me 6 months to finish a game that I basically prototyped in 1 day. The game was finally released in March 2016, and that day, my product manager over at Bulkypix Skyped me and said, hey, your app is featured worldwide on the front page of the App Store. And this was super surprising to me because at this point, all I knew was that they had pitched the game to Apple. They didn't tell me how the meeting went. And since I personally didn't think the game was very good, I was very surprised that this happened. Over the next 2 weeks, it got 365,000 downloads and it plateaued around 400,000 downloads. I wasn't expecting to get this many users at launch, but I also wasn't expecting the downloads to drop off this quickly. I thought that if I had just built up enough awareness of the game, I would get more organic installs. But what ended up happening is that it basically became irrelevant right after it dropped off of the top charts. You can see that my ad revenue per day matches up pretty closely with my downloads per day. And I wasn't surprised by this because I knew the user retention would be low. But I was hoping that I would make more than a few $1,000s considering that I had 400,000 people playing my game. After the game died, I didn't put too much thought into it because I was busy with exams and job interviews. But then a few weeks later, I was really concerned because Bulkypix wasn't sending me my ad payments and they were also ignoring all my emails. Then one other developer who was also working with them reached out to me and he said that he wasn't getting paid either. 2 months later, I found out that Bulkypix went bankrupt and I didn't get paid a single penny. But this wasn't actually an important part of the story because by this point, I had already decided that I wasn't going to be making any more hyper-casual games. Before I explain this further, I want to show you the bigger picture for why this genre of games took over the App Store. There are 2 key advantages that hyper-casual game developers try to exploit. First of all, because these games are so simple to make, they can build them very quickly. Voodoo launches a new game every couple of days, and by doing this, they can test their ideas and gather data much faster than other kinds of game developers. I think that a lot of startups in general can learn from Voodoo's ruthless focus on launching new products. Second, the audience for these games are very broad because they're so simple and easy to understand. but this is a double-edged sword. The flip side is that nobody really likes these games that much, so the user attention is very low. In addition to low user attention, very few players will buy anything in these games, so they're relying on ads to make money. But according to an article on VentureBeat, 60% of the ads on hyper-casual games are actually just promoting other hyper-casual games. So if you think about it, for this 60% of the ads, the industry is actually not generating any money. It's just the companies within it exchanging money with each other. The reason the industry can sustain itself is because the other 40% of the ads is sold to brands and other mobile game genres. The main argument for the growth of the hyper-casual genre is that it's introducing non-gamers to games. So the advertising space is very valuable to these other mobile game genres. For example, let's say that the first game I ever play in my life is Flappy Bird, and then inside Flappy Bird, I see an ad for a more hardcore game, like Angry Birds, and then I'm like, oh, maybe I'll check it out. The main problem with all of this, in my opinion, is that eventually people are going to realize that playing these games is an extremely unfulfilling experience. It's already much harder to get people to download your app now compared to a few years ago, and the standards for app quality is just getting higher and higher. Eventually, I think some game developer will figure out how to make a very good game that actually appeals to a broad audience of non-gamers. And I don't know what this game is going to look like, but I think that when it comes out, it's going to change the entire industry. I think that 10 years from now, people are going to be looking at the hyper-casual games from these last few years, and they're going to think, wow, why would anybody want to play that? It's kind of like how we see those old bad TV shows from the 90s with a lot of commercials in them. If there's one thing that you should take away from all this, is that you shouldn't be afraid to build something just because there's a big company in the space. Voodoo just raised $200 million, and apparently they test out 300 to 400 games every month. But somehow, everything they make is crap that was inspired by this one dude in Vietnam who made one popular game in a few days. There are a ton of indie games released 10 or more years ago that are still fun and relevant today. But how many of Voodoo's games will anyone remember 10 years from now? You might argue that their whole business is built to capitalize on a trend, and whoever's running the show is going to be so rich in 10 years that they're not going to care what happens to the company. But if you take a deeper look at the numbers, the estimated total revenue for all of Voodoo's apps in September 2019 was only $500,000 according to Sensor Tower. And considering that they had to pay for a lot of their 77 million downloads that month, and considering that they have to pay off their 194 employees, this company is definitely losing money. And at the end of the day, would you rather be the dude in this suit who pretends to know what he's doing when he's actually just throwing a bunch of darts on the wall and hoping that something sticks? Or would you rather be the dude in his room who made one popular game that he thought was cool and ended up changing an industry forever? That's it for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.